Hello everyone, welcome back to Akaliko Audio. In this episode, we're going to have a look at the differences of being born and dying for the soul in comparison to a birth of a thought and the death of a thought. Now, soul has also been known as athmaya, and the concept of the soul has been there a long time prior to Gautama Buddha. The soul has a birth into a mother's womb, and it's something that we sense and feel. Everyone in society sees that and experiences that around them. The one who is born lives and then dies. We all know this. Then after death, some people say that there is another birth, either in this plane of existence or a different plane of existence. Now, that's all in relation to a soul. However, bavaya, or a single thought stated by the Gautama Buddha, is something that isn't caught in the past, present, or future. It is a phenomenon that is happening to every being right now. At each and every moment that we see that a thought arises, the Gautama Buddha described that as bavaya. And vaya is the cessation of the thought. Now, this altogether describes the process of the mind. Anywhere where there is life on earth, every species, every animal, this event of bhava and vaya arising and ceasing is occurring. So let's discuss this in a little bit more detail and have a look at how bhavaya is occurring in this moment. Gautama Buddha investigated the mind. In this investigation, what he did was he watched each and every thought that came into his mind ends then and there. He repeated this process thought after thought, where he observed the arising of them and then the cessation of them happening at the same time. This activity is called Arya Parikshana, which means noble investigation. As he continued this, at one moment, the mind and the concept of I completely deleted and emptied. The whole of the mind and the concept of I deleting and emptying is the event Gautama Buddha described as nirvana. If someone is said to be aware of nirvana, seeing nirvana, ready to observe nirvana, then that is through the cessation of thought, which is also known as nirodha. If one sees this nirodha, then it is said that they have nivandakma, which is nirvana vision. It is also said that if they see it, they have buddhundakma, which means Buddha vision. Now let's look at how this process happens. Bhavaya, by the full meaning of the word, is relative to the mind. What happens in the mind all the time? Thoughts are flowing in, aren't they? These thoughts that are flowing in, for example, table. When that finishes, chair comes in. When that finishes, backyard comes in. And when that finishes, gate may come in. And then after that, road may come in. And this continues on and on. So what we can see is that thoughts come in one after other. In this way, the mind at a moment, one thought lands. It's always only one thought and never two thoughts at one time. This thought landing in our mind is called samudaya, arising. Where it arose and then ceased is called nirodha. This thought, registration, and the eventuating process is what Gautama Buddha described as bhavaya. This is how that happens. Now, when the thought table comes, the thought table and the dependent origination or relative memory to it also comes with it at this moment. As the memory is registered a trail of images and form follows. This is due to when table the thought lands in the mind, there is a recognition of memory. There, a trail of name and form step out. The concept of the senses also arise in that moment. That is called bavaya. Now, the full word is bavaya. However, bava alludes to the arising. Vaya alludes to the cessation. Now, how did this bava component happen? The perception of table when it arises and is registered, dependently originating or relatively flowing comes the memory associated with it. As memory is registered, the eyes, ears, tongue, nose, body, and mind, in other words, the concept of senses, is also registered. This is what leads to the contact, feeling, attachment, and greed that follows on with it. This whole process is called bava. When it's translated, bava means becoming. Vaya means unbecoming. How many syllables are in table? Te, bu. You can see that there's 2 syllables. When te comes in, then that ends before bu comes in. And then when bu ends, then the next thing can come in. Each of the syllables by their own must end before the next syllable comes in, then and there. They dissipate into nothing before the next syllable comes across. At this moment, we can see that every thought's nature is that it arises and ceases. If we take the syllables of dining chair, we have die, which begins and ends, before ning begins and ends, and then follows chair. Now, we can see that the perception of the dining chair has arose and ceased at the same time, because each of the syllables must end before the next syllable starts. If we take backyard, we have back, and then after this has ended, we get yard. So as the thought of backyard has arisen, it has also ceased. In this way, every thought as it arises has also ceased. So this arising is what Gautama Buddha described as bava. For backyard, the memory gets registered, and then the flow of images and form relative to this gets registered. Then the concept of the senses associated with this also arises. This has a deep relationship with the dependent origination, because in Pali, avidya pacha sankhara, ignorance gives rise to perception. Sankhara pacha vijnana, perception gives rise to memory. Vijnana pacha nama rupa, memory gives rise to name and form. Nama rupa pacha salayatana, name and form gives rise to senses. Salayatana pacha passo, senses give rise to contact. Passa pacha vedana, contact gives rise to feeling. Vedana pacha tanha, feeling gives rise to greed. Tanha pacha upadana, greed gives rise to attachment. Upadana pacha bhava, attachment gives rise to becoming. It's a lot to take in, but at the same time, it's very important because that describes the true process of the mind. What happens as each single thought arises in our mind? Now, how did the bhava get registered? It became registered as we observed the thought table, which rose to the associated memory, and then the memory gave rise to the concept of the senses and the idea of self, bhava. Okay, so going back to our example of table, we can see that as the syllables te arises and then it ceases, bu, the syllable arises and then ceases. At that moment that it ends, it deletes and empties from our mind. The deletion of a thought causes the associated memories, the concept of the senses, as well as the concept of the self, also to cease. This is introduced as vaya or nirodha. Therefore, bavaya both happen simultaneously, where there is the nirodha or the ending of the thought. Gautama Buddha introduced this ending as nirvana. Nirvana can be translated to extinguishment or putting out a flame. There is no thought, memory, senses, or self at this nirvana. That event, which occurs at every moment, is what Gautama Buddha advised us to build awareness on. Now, going back, where there is the birth of a soul, there is a womb, a mother, and a father, a child who is born. However, what the Buddha introduced as bavaya is the thought, where the thought arises and ceases, and the thought is born and the thought dies. Gautama Buddha introduced this as the momentary death. The cessation of thoughts is a deletion which occurs from moment to moment. He also introduced this as pratisandhi chuti. So it's the coming into existence and then the vanishing of it. The coming into existence and the vanishing of it. We can all observe when we close our eyes that this phenomenon of thought comes and goes. It begins and it ends. It arises and it ceases. Can we take this awareness through to our everyday life? Because when the awareness grows of this process where thought appears and disappears, the samudaya and the nirodha, what we can see is our mind becomes astonishingly clear because the chatter in our mind stops. Now, we can go deeper into this in the future where we can see that even a single thought, they can be observed into smaller and smaller fragments. This is known as chittaviti and chittakshana, but we will discuss those in more detail in a future episode. Thanks very much for joining again, and I just wanted to make one request. If it sits right with you, if this helps you to understand your mind and let go of thoughts, empty your mind, get clarity in your consciousness, then could you please share this with just one person, whether that's a family member close to you or a close friend. That would really help get this message out there and help others as well. Have a great week.